Okay, so we're going to go through MCQL quickly with everybody so that you all understand what MCQL is, okay, and what it does. So the few concepts that we need to understand before we get going here is, first of all, what is persistence? Okay, so persistence is saving things permanently. So in our case, we persist to a database, okay? And then the other concept we all need to understand is ORM. Anybody here know what ORM is? Yes, object relational mapping. So what that means is in object-oriented languages, we need to, well, you don't have to, but generally you're sitting with an issue of mapping data to your classes, okay? So you use an object relational mapper, which will use the reflection API built into Java to map the strings onto the actual variables that you've declared in your classes. So JSON is our ORM, but that's for JSON data, okay? And then we've got, now in this case, MCQL, which is one we built ourselves. And then there's also like other alternatives. This would be like Hibernate. If you guys have worked with Spring before, Hibernate's a common one, or JPA, which is the Java Persistence API. Okay, pretty much the same concept throughout all of them. So what MCQL does particularly well is it requires less information to do the relational mapping, okay? And two, it's excellent at switching between databases. So that was actually one of the primary reasons why we don't use like Hibernate or JPA, because of the way they do connection mapping. It's difficult with our architecture where we have, let's say, 1,000 DBs that we're switching between. Okay, so generally when you're working on a project like, let's say, the Kazang DIY or something like that, with just one DB, it doesn't really show its benefits as compared to Hibernate and that. But like with the projects like Lyt-Soft, yeah, Hibernate in them failed to work because of the amount of DB connections that's made across several different schemas. Okay, so but everybody understands that MCQL is the library we use to map the DB, right, to the object in Java. Okay, we all understanding that concept? Okay, so we're just gonna get test MCQL. Let's say we're gonna make this the like the test class, and then we'll have test data test now. Okay. So we'll have a test logic test or thing, and we'll have a test DB class. So we'll just call test DB model, okay? Okay. So MCQL, you always have to initialize it on yours. I think it's between the servlet initializer. Yeah, you can see these things that we pass here. Okay, so these things, first of all, what it's talking about the class.4name SQL MySQL driver here, right? When you're going to look at that, you'll just find, so all persistence uses the JDBC for at the back end. You here knows what JDBC is? Anybody? Okay, so JDBC is the actual thing that Java uses to connect to the database. Okay? Java database controller, it's just that, yeah, JDBC, right? So that's the actual like thing that connects to the DB. So persistence APIs is something that came later on. Originally, we just used to use JDBC to connect to the DB, right? Via raw queries or prepared queries, okay? Are we all familiar with what's the difference between a raw query and a prepared query? Like a prepared statement versus a raw query? Say again? Okay, but why do we use prepared statements compared to raw queries? What is the reason we do that? Thank you. That and also formatting issues. Okay, because if you don't use so SQL injection is like one of the reasons why we use it, yes, because if you using raw queries and you just like concatenating strings together, right? Somebody can pass a command in the string and SQL would interpret it as being a command, right? So that's what they're talking about SQL injection, but that's not the only reason. The other reason is like when we're writing queries, we're putting in key strings and stuff, right? Okay. So if using a raw query, if somebody uses a seen as a command, right? It will fuck up your query. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example on what I mean just now. Quickly, give me, do you have a DB there? What's your IP? 1.177, right? What's your DB name that you have? Ah, Simon Gillian. So quickly create me a table they called test. So 46306. What's your user? Password? Come write your password. Okay, so again on this connection string, this is telling MCQL what to connect. Okay, so user, SQL password, type in your password there, please. Okay, root, then atmosonda, okay, then the URL or host name, so you can also use host names. Jeez, why is it doing that now? Then port number, then the DB name, and then the amount of connection pools you want to assign to it. That's what the last character is, this connection pool assignment, okay? I'm just zooming so that everybody can see. Yes. That's first, okay. So this, in general, when you're dealing with persistence APIs and whenever you're dealing with larger DB connections, right? You normally want to use a pooling mechanism, okay? So even something like Hibernate implements that as well, right? Where it, when you make a connection to it, right? It will sometimes reuse the connection that's already been established. Don't every time go and create a new connection to the DB, because otherwise you're going to use too many connections to the DB. Okay? So it uses something called connection pools. So I'm not sure what Hibernate uses in the background, but what we use is Ikari data pools. So if you want to go and do a bit of research on what that means, go look up Ikari data pools, okay? So all we're saying is like immediately create 50 connections to the DB, right? And then basically keep them alive. So that when a command comes in, you don't have to first establish a connection to the DB. It's already connected. It can just query. You understand? So you're telling it like what's the like in there, if you're going to MCQL, which you guys won't for now, you're still amateurs, but when you get into it later on, right? You'll like even tell it how many to keep alive. What's this is your max connection count, okay? But you can tell it like keep alive 10 connections for me at all times, like the minimum connection thread, right? And it also does like polling to the DB, so it will even tell you the DB is offline before you try and connect to the DB, because it's constantly communicating and managing that connection for you. Okay, so this is just a setting on Ikari data pools to say like, okay, this app we're expecting 50 connections. So when you're dealing with like Lyt-Soft, you'll generally put this at like at 4 times or 5 times user base. So we have currently about 2,000 active devices on Lyt-Soft. So we'll normally set it to 8 to 10,000 data pool, right? So if we have like, because we make a lot of connections to the DB, like on a single call, we might be pulling from the DB 4 times. Okay, so this enables like trading on the DB and stuff stuff like that. It does a lot of the connection management for you. Where previously, when we were using JDBC correctly, it was not JDBC correctly, directly, sorry. When we're using it directly, right, you have to like open the connection, close the connection, open the connection, close the connection. So you would do a try with resource. Who is familiar with try with resource? Huh? Okay, so try with resource is a try, right? But with a finally. So the try will open the connection, and then the finally will close the connection. Okay, you've seen that, right? So that's called the try with resource. So that back in the day we used to do that. Okay, when we were doing now Ikari does a lot of that for us. Okay, so it manages our connection. Now, when it comes to actually using the thing, generally what I would recommend is like under your utils to initiate something like an SQL class like this, right? Which you just call public class SQL, which extends SQL, right? So whenever you have SQL mapper for now, right? Whenever you see this extends SQL mapper, what this does is it tells the thing that this is an SQL class. Okay? I'm trying to map some form of table or something. Okay? But we generally have this one, which we just call SQL, which is not really related to any particular table, right? Just that we can use it for our own queries. Okay? So always have this set up in your project somewhere. All these other things are not necessary. This is not necessary. Just the top part. So you just have an empty class. All of this shit's not necessary, to be honest with you. Have this in your utils, okay? So I'll show you now this issue. So I'm just going to paste this back. But trust me, the rest of this stuff's not necessary at all. Okay? You can just do this. Okay? Do we all understand what extends means? You're going to create this class, right? Which is just an empty SQL mapper class, right? So, Musona, this is where you are having the issue, right? You never said extends SQL mapper, so that's why I said DB doesn't know what you're talking about. Okay, so let's just first of all go through how to use that empty SQL block. Okay? So that would be used in the same way as a traditional ORM. That's the way to access raw queries and prepared statement your own. Okay? Not via object relational mapping. That's why we create that. And so we create the class here. Whatever. Boom. Okay. So now let's say we just want to query something from the DB or maybe do something complex like joins or whatever, which by the way, never do joins. Should always be done through views, right? We shouldn't be coding joins here. Always when you feel the need to join something, create a view. Okay? So now HTML equals new HTML. So you see, so this way we can just like basically create an instance of HTML. Okay. Then we can now say var is normally equals SQL dot gets dots. Okay. And then in here we can now type in our query. So select text. Right, just created a text. What is in the text here? That's it. This ID. Okay. And then we understand the rs.next thing. Does everybody understand how to move through a result set? First of all, does everybody understand what a result set is? The way you guys sound is that I should just better explain it. Okay. So this is not a true result set, by the way. It's a custom implementation of result set. But the true result set is an object returned by JDBC, okay, which is something similar to a list, okay, that allows you to loop through results from a DB. Okay, so whatever your query is goes into a result set, and then you can loop through that result set to get your data. So generally how you loop through a result set is with while, okay, rs dot next, right? Okay, so that what that does, so yeah. No, because RS works, result sets works on, it's like a list, right? Like with the list, you would generally like do a for loop, right? And you would like say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that, right? So they've implemented a thing which this next does an iteration to the next one in the list. So it's like a thing that's implemented in result set. It's a thing that happens with the result set. They just, instead of you saying for loop 0 and the result set dot length, right? They've just allowed you rs dot next. So what that thing does is it makes this rs object, when you like say rs dot get string, right? And you say like maybe column 1, right? What this now does is it will know that it must look at the next iteration. Like if we put this before we say next, right? It will say before first. It will give an error. It will say that rs is before first. Yeah, basically an out of bounds exception, but we'll say you're before the first record. so, so you've not looked into the first record. So imagine this rs.next is basically saying something similar to, it's something similar to this, okay? And then you say rs I dot x3. Okay, that's what it, that rs.next removes the need for you to have the I. You understand? So imagine that rs starts with rs dot -1 is how it starts, okay? So when you say rs dot next, when you say rs dot next, what you are telling it is basically now we're going to change it to rs0. You understand? And then it will go next. Now, if it reaches its length, rs won't go dot next. It will return false. So remember, this is like an if statement, but for a loop. Because what you're basically saying, if rs.next go, if rs.next go, so when rs.next returns false, because this actually returns true, by the way. It returns a true value and sets it to the next to the next iteration, to the next record. Are we following what's happening here? So basically what you're saying is if rs.next, then get the data. But while is just like if, but in a loop. You understand that, Masonda? So while is an if, but in a loop. You understand what I'm saying? So think of it like this, right? This is kind of what you're doing. So if rs.next else, right? That's basically what you're doing. Okay? Well, what you want to know? What's the? How do you know the length? Yeah. Okay, so by default, it doesn't have a length. It doesn't return that to you because it expects you to use the next method. But this, so this RS that you see here is not true RS. It's a, so check it. We like remove this. It won't be saying Java. It won't say SQL results set. It will be RS. You see, it says custom RS, right? This is our implementation of RS, right? Because the issue with using RS itself is that you are holding that DB connection for as long as you are looping through it. So what we do is we've just mimicked its behavior, right? So we're actually taking that RS, immediately casting it to a list, which we've just called custom RS, but it behaves the same as the results. Okay. Now, so I think we do have a way of checking the RS length, if I'm not mistaken, but by default there isn't such a thing. I think it's there. It's the length. What's it? We even have it. Oh no, we don't. So generally, like, so it works the same way as standard RS. So if you want to get the size of something, you need to do RS dot last, right? Then you get RS dot last, and you get RS dot get row, right? So that's your length, okay? And then you have to say RS dot before first. You set it back to the. So that's how you get your length from a result set. Is everybody understanding that, or everybody's confused? Huh? This provider. Right, we're busy on MCQL now. We're busy on MCQL. Okay, so we understand how to get this before first, and so if you do rs dot last, you get that right, and then you want to go rs dot next, right? It's never gonna go in here because it's set to the last row already, so it will go out. You understand? It won't ever go into this while loop. Yes, you have to say rs dot before first if you ever want to get the length of it. Okay, or maybe in an instance where you just want to get the first value, right? You can like go rs dot next and then like have a boolean here, boolean first. Okay, set it to true. Right, so sometimes you have something where you want to get header values and line values and inside in one table. So you just the first time you will get like your if first is true. So if then populate your header values, okay, and then set first default. Do you understand what we've done there? So if you ever have a scenario where you want to populate both your headers, like you've got like header values and line values all in one table, right? You can use this to just capture your first values and then let it go. Okay, but that's just general, like using it in the old sense, like raw querying or something like that. Now, the other thing you've got is get selected pair, right? Which is this, and then comma, and then your variable. So with prepared statements, which is the preferred way to do it, by the way. Okay, you're like saying where's ID, you're saying it's ID, ID equals, and then you put a question mark. So remember with this question mark that all your values that you want to put has to be in line with this question. You understand what I'm saying with that? So we can even make this a question mark, by the way. Now, okay. Then you can say, okay, and that will make sure it's escaped properly when it is passed. Okay. So now, what is the risk with raw queries, right? The risk with raw queries is something we actually encounter quite a lot when we're creating product, right? So, standard. So normally your code will look like this, right? So now the issue we have with raw queries is like where let's say description equals, let's say we use this to escape, right? Or to circle on this scale. You tell it that this is a variable, right? Right. So now we want to say that's false. Okay. So you see what it has done. What's the issue with that? So let's quickly take this into SQL editor. You see that? You see what's happening? You see? Because that character is seen as a key character, right? It closes it, okay? And also you see description is blue. Description is blue, meaning it's a keyword in SQL, okay? So this is what's the issue when you're not using prepared statements. Yeah, or you can just use a prepared statement and it won't have that issue. Prepared statements does all the escapes for you. So like I said, injection is one of the reasons, but the primary reason is actually this, right? That to avoid these issues. Okay, and these issues, because this, you can even, like, it's supposed to be this, right? Right? So that's why it's important to use prepared statements. If you don't get this error, no amount of testing is ever going to show you that. Okay? And then you say, oh, but it's easy. All we do is we utilize this, because you can also use this, right? So then it works, right? Until somebody goes and says that pause is a foreign. Then you're sitting with the same issue again. You understand? So prepared statements is the way to go. So this would throw an error, but this, right? If we go prepared, that would work perfectly fine. Okay? So, but generally, just as a side note, always when you're writing queries, do this on your fields. Just make sure that you're not leaving keywords, because like stuff like date, sometimes we name a field date, and it's going to eat the keyword, or we name it group, and group is a keyword. You understand what I mean? So let's, like, generally, I always do that just to avoid any errors, right? Okay, everybody understands the role query? Okay, that turns to an RS. So just remember in Java, you have two different commands for getting and for inserting and updating. Okay, so when you insert an update, you insert raw, get into prepared. So same concept there, just insert raw, insert prepared. Okay. So insert raw will allow you to get a standard string, and insert prepare will allow you to pass the parameter separately, which again should always be what we go nowadays. Okay. Now, this is how to use it in terms of raw query. Now let's get into the part that I actually wanted to explain to you guys. Okay, so you've created a tuple test there, right? So at table. So generally, if your table is named the same thing as your class name, MCQL will automatically link it to one. Okay. So that add table name annotation is to allow you to set the table name. Okay. So then we say extends SQL mapper. Okay. Always pass this class name in here. Okay. Just always. Okay. Then you have to say add SQL mapper. SQL mapper annotation. Key. You have to set parameter key to turn on one of the fields, otherwise it won't work. Okay. So I'm presuming it's integer, right? Okay. Another thing to always keep aware of is to always use I don't have to set the value. Okay. Always use the object, never the parameter. so there's like integer like that is an object, not a primitive. Int is a primitive. Now what's the difference between the two, right? Yeah, let's actually run it, then I can show you guys what's the difference between these two. I think it's going to be an error because it's going to take a calculate, but let me tell you like that what's the difference. Okay. When you have these two, um, yes. Okay. So you see we can instantiate it both on the public level, right? We're not instantiated, we just declared it, right? Now see the difference, how the primitive behaves between the difference between the primitive and the object, right? So the first one that's going to be int is the primitive, and the second one is the object. Okay. So let's run this. Please, see what a time to lag. Why are you not running for? Come on, come on, come on, come on. Come on. Jeez. That's why I need an increase character. Yeah. Look at this. Running a single file. Eventually. Eventually, but this is easy. Why do you want to go the whole project? Let's run this one file. Make it easy, go to PC. Compiling 115 classes. I never asked you to compile 115 classes. Okay, so you see the difference between the two? Okay, who's seeing it? Int, right, is 0, right? And integer is, you see that? So now why is that important to use the integer and not int? Any ideas? Why? It will show it as null, yeah. You understand what he's saying? If you're gonna allow the thing to put values for you that is predefined, right? When there's actually no value, it's gonna put a 0 there. So you will then read it as 0 instead of null. Same with when you're using JSON. Always use this, never this. Because when the object that you're receiving doesn't have a value, so just put the primitive default there. So look at this. Now, on integers, you can still say, yeah, I can manage this. Now look at this. Okay? This is the object, this is the primitive, right? Now look at how bad this is. Not random object. Oh my gosh. Stop making, stop. So relax. Now check how bad this is when you're looking at booleans. So whenever you're dealing with a reflection, don't ever use primitive values, please. Okay, so just wait for the output. My gosh. You see here? It actually puts it as false. Yeah. So now you think that the false value has been passed. Meanwhile, there was no value passed. You see? So it's crucial. So you know you're using the object when it's white. When it's this other color, it's a primitive value. Okay? And generally the object's always capital. The primitives are not capital. Okay? So do we see why it's important that we use the right one? Now imagine like you want to create this table, right? And you make it int ID, right? So how we know that we need to assign an ID to it is because it's null. That's when we will use the DB to create an ID. If it finds 0 there, it's going to try and update the record 0. You understand? So always that value, okay? Okay. Sona, can you just add a few additional, just add first maybe name, surname there, okay? So then we add string, name, name, and string surname, okay? Okay. So that always add data annotation at the top. You don't have to use add data, but it's nice because it does your getters and setters for you. Okay. This class doesn't need a constructor. It uses the default no params constructor. Do we all understand what that means? That it uses the default constructor? Yes, no argument. So in Java, when you put something like this, what you're actually saying is this. You're actually saying this. Okay. It's just not there. It's like the same way when we say right, this actually means this. You know that when you're saying void, you're actually returning now. Yes. What's the return type of void? Hmm? No. Okay. So we put that data there, we put the table name there, and we put primary key for top one. So what if our primary key is not an integer? We can put auto-generated false, right? So that just means like the system shouldn't auto-generate it. We'll always put the value for it. Like in terms of like UUIDs, you can put that as false, right? So the system won't try and create it for you. So like string API key, okay? Like that, okay? So why are you looking for a second? Fine. So like that string API key, that will work, okay? Okay, now, how do you actually use this? Okay. So now we want to get our records from test logic. You've added those things. Have you added some data files there or not yet? Let's add like some two, three rows. Okay, we're just going to initialize it from here because we're not running the entire project, okay? Is everybody understanding what I mean with that or not really? Because I'm just running it from here. I'm not going to initialize the whole project. So I just want to put the put this here just so I can initialize this, okay? Everybody understanding why I'm doing that? So you would normally never actually do that. We do understand that, right? Do we all understand that? Do you understand why I'm doing this? I'm feeling like nobody is getting why I'm doing this. Just because I'm not running the whole project, people. Yeah, I'm just starting it in the main thread here, okay? Okay. We all understand why I'm doing this. Please don't get confused by this. You'll never do this. Okay, I'm just doing it so that I don't have to run the whole project to run my test project in here. Everybody understanding that? Oscar? Oscar, you're not paying attention. So if you're coming with MCQL questions tomorrow, oh my god. Charity, explain to this guy how busy I am, and that I'm taking my time to explain to him, then he's busy doing other. Like, there'll be hellfire and brimstone if you don't pay attention to that. Okay, so when we want to instantiate one, right? We do this. Okay. So what we're telling the system is like basically I'm gonna look into that table now. Okay. So it's now the system is busy preparing for you to look into that table. You getting that? Okay. So we can first of all you can just set values if you want to. I hate this. It's on the you are right. I hate this thing. It's just add data normal. You always have to go before it. Like for status and get this. Okay, so we said close. Okay, this dot state name, state surname. Okay, no here. Okay, So generally, it's a good idea to always set DB just to make sure you're on the right DB connection, okay? Before you do any of the queries. Okay. So what this will do is it instantiates a test logic instance, okay? We set the name, the surname, and we set the DB, okay? Okay, so we can just listen now. Yeah. Okay. So you just see how it looks. And then hopefully if all goes well, they should run correct. One day, someday, the code will be running. As you see, it's starting the current data pool connection. So it's trying to connect to this DB now. But you see how long it takes to start the connection. That's why it's good to use a connection pooling thing, that you don't have these delays once the DB connection is running. So this is taking unusually long. Are you sure your details are correct, Sonda? Is your DB available? Yeah. My PC that's slow, is your PC that's slow. It's slow. It's not able to connect to Sonda. What's wrong with the DB connection? Okay, so we can right. Yeah. Already have one text. It's terrible ones. Yeah. Looking at the Okay. Where's our, we never call out this one. Not right. Yeah, how do people mess this? We never called out. We never actually called the class. Yeah, you see it? Wow, it's done. Okay. So this create returns to us now also the ID, right? Because assigned to it in the DB. You see, when you create, the object then turns into that newly created object. So all the default from the DB and stuff will be present in it. Oscar, I hope you're paying attention. I want to keep calling your attention here. I'm going to close your laptop and chuck it out of the room, please. Okay, so while it's done, there, okay? You all see? Okay, now, quickly, like, do another one. What's your son, Musamba? Huh? Yeah, so I just want to create two, so I want to show you the next thing. So now again, it's going to create the second video class. So you're saying dot create, right? You see that? You're finding it interesting character. Chuck, you can agree to that meeting. Remember they're ready. So they're people outside. So okay. So they're not ready. So now, let's say we want to now, we're done with our creating, right? We want to update the Sonda, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to say case equals case dot where name equals, okay? And now here, you can also say dot where again and dot where, dot where. You can link it up like that. So go like search and. Are we aware of that? Okay. You understand what I'm saying, Musonda? Okay. And then we can, when we want a single instance, we say dot first. Okay. So that will return only the records, the first record that matches this query. Okay. Return the single one. That's why I can return it to test logic as a single object, because basically what we say is that, right? Right? You understand what I'm saying? So the first returns the first record, okay? So what we'll do is we'll put them up just to prove it. Yeah. Okay. Now we want to update it. Okay. So just by the way, always best if you just leave up here so that just make sure that you're the right DB always. It should be because here, but we tend to change a lot of DBs in our projects, so it's just good practice to set it again, okay? So now I'm going to say test dot set name. Say again? So not yet. So all you've done now is you've changed it in RAM. You've not changed, you've not persisted it. Right? It's just been set on that object. So when we go here now, when we do this, that will say not Masonda, right? But if we just leave it at this point and we do this again, it will bring Masonda. Because we've not saved it yet, we've just updated it in RAM. Like in the app, it's updated, but it's not been updated in the DB. So now we need to tell the DB that we want to update that regularly. So what we'll say is test. I'm obsessive about setting the DB, as you can see. It's just a very easy way to avoid issues. And then you say dot save. Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah, so what this query right now is going to do, right? This one that we've written here now, it's going to go and basically the query that we've written in terms of how it will write it will be update in stable state, right? Set name equals not right? Where the primary key, because it knows the primary key, because we said that primary key, remember? Where ID equals 2, because it knows it's ID 2 because we put it on the DB here. So that's basically what we're doing. So if you set another value, all you're doing is you're doing this. The surname equals, that's all you're doing if you're going to say set surname. So on creation, there's default values. There's default requirements. But on update, you can update the single thing. You don't have to update the whole row. It's just on creation, there's certain things that must be there to create. But on update, you can just update any one of the columns. But remember, if you are raw querying and update, you always put the where. Because if you don't have that, you update the whole fucking DB. You know that, right? Okay. So to answer your question, basically, no, it won't be an issue because you're just setting the name. Right? Even if name was default, not default, doesn't matter. Because you've already created it, you just updating that column. So when update, you can update any single column. Okay? So now when we run it, and then just also thing. Huh? No, it's just the priority of your output. So you get system.out and system.err. It's just prioritizing it on the console. So it depends on what your debugging mode on your console is like. Sometimes system out won't show up. System error always shows up. So that's why I use system error. Just because it always pops up here. But there is a way to make system out also pop up, but who cares? We're just using system error to pop it out onto the console. So basically, if you want to make sure it pops up, use PRR. Okay. But the technical answer, what I'm saying is wrong. Okay. But in usability and use case, it's right. Technically, system out should be used for notifications and errors should be used for errors. Okay. But the issue is our outputs at the bottom is by default set to info. So we don't always show system out. So I'm going to just remove this one so we don't have that confusion of it showing it to you in RAM. So right now what we're going to do, we're going to go and get Masonda. We're going to output Masonda as it is currently in the DB, right? And then we're going to update its name and save it and then get it from the DB again and show it. Okay? But that is 10 years of clicking that button. You don't know that? No, anything with public service would make it right. Yeah, I was not going to audition you like that. I'm not allowed to be happy and laughing while I'm teaching them. It's so important to teach them. Okay. First record, why is it not giving us a second output? Ah, so that is not. What are you asking me? Somehow I wasn't 100% aware of that. It's just going to be there so that you can see how that, because it threw an error and then see. You drew it nicely. I'm waiting for the partner to get back to me. First post is in order. Why is this? Why is this no? Why is this no? Just like God's outputting your name one time, right? Yeah. Ah, it's updated in the DD already. Sorry. Oh, so now it will both be not Masonda. Let me just quickly go and manually change it back to Masonda and then we can rerun it. Yeah. Okay. You understand that? Now, I want to show you if you want to get multiple records, right? Okay. So let's just say we want to get everything in that table, right? So instead of having maybe you can have a where maybe okay, let's add something in the DB called Boolean through, okay, and we'll set it to 1, right? So just so you understanding what I want to show you. No, but these guys also. Okay. So followers. Okay. So now let's say okay, like that, right? So remember when you are passing a value like false, not to put in a string. Okay. So if you want to use a string, use 0. Okay, because string false is a different meaning to false in a Boolean sense. Okay. You understand that? Okay, so you can look at it like that. And then you're going to say, so first we'll return only the first record it finds that's false. But .get will return alert. Now you see it's throwing an error, right? Because this is a single object. So what you need to do is this logic, okay, and then the voice power. Okay, like that. Okay, so that's now our list. Okay, and then we can just like so I prefer this folder by the way. So this folder no, that's not specifically, not for each. Because for each, trust me, it's a threaded thing because it's using what's that? This that uses that, right? You know, this thing. What do they call that? You guys know what I'm talking about or not? Huh? You can outdoor for each, right? So you see it. You see this, right? It's I forgot the technical name now. But basically, whenever you're using like also thread has it, so you uh, whenever you use that, right? It's running it in a separate thread. So it's not thread side. So meaning you're gonna have issues. Like let's say for example, let me give you a quick example why I don't like that folder. So let's say we have list screen, right? Name screen. Like we're gonna call it names, right? Equals video. Okay. So now if we go out for each, I would say names or that is is so now it's not complaining, but it's gonna complain when you run it that names is declared here, which is in a separate thread than the for each. Getting what I'm saying or not? Um, well, generally when you use that's great. What do you call this? Forgot the name now. In any case, when you use that, it's generally in a separate place. It's a problem. So when I'm doing for loops, I always prefer it in for loop. Yeah, but there's a specific name for it. I just forgot the name. Because it only came later. It's not from Java 8. It only came in Java 11, if I'm not mistaken. So, but the issue, there are threading issues, trust me. So, like, let's say when we return the names now, we can just say names of add and it will work. Names of add, and we can add a or get more like that, right? So to add the names. But just for now, is let's say n equals like that. Okay. You understand what's gonna happen here? So it's gonna go where that. Okay, it's gonna return a list to you, and then you can do whatever you want with the list. Also, if you want, you can set them to approve by looping through them and saying a dot set approve through. You understand what I mean? Dot say and go say through the list. But generally, what you would do with the list is you would just chuck it in a JSON object and return it. That's 90% of the time what you're going to do. Because normally it's like somebody searching data. So you're just going to get it and chuck it and turn it in a list. You understand what I mean? You understand what I mean? Yeah. For that. Wrong button. Okay, so dot get is the one that returns to your list of things. So the thirds are not those one, right? Then that is what's in the video also. The special TV. Okay. So if we run the same thing but we make Musunda through, it will not return Musunda's name. $580 quarter. It return interest because not Musunda is approved. You see? Yeah. But it's still returning it in a list format, even though it's just one. You see, that's the difference between Java and JavaScript, right? In JavaScript, you just create like it's now one. In Java, because you're saying it's a list, it's a list. So even though there's just one record return, you still have to get that record. So like that's why dot first is specifically to return one, right? Well, dot get is ineffective if you're planning on returning one. So you can use it, but then you still have to get the one, you still have to go like list dot get 0, right? And return that to maybe what was our top one test, right? So you basically just wasted your time by having to add this now. If you know it's one, there's no point. Plus, this is a good chance of throwing a null pointer now. Because what if there isn't one? What if nothing matches that? Because you're statically saying 0 here. You understand? Any questions? Where I don't know just but sometimes it is fun because it's not very when I've been out you will still be close. Okay, what got the thing? So it's good to no one is running. You type something. Yeah, for sure. Sometimes copy and paste your values here. Maybe that will help. But no, it's your short code that's making it return document values or null or whatever. And you can say dot where again, right? And you can input limits as well. What limit? Yeah. So what about what's the column name and the true or false? So descending true or false. The descending is still if you are descending to false. What's the other thing? Okay. What must be the last thing? Offset. So do you know what's offset? You're doing like pagination, right? So you can say like skip the first 10 records and then you can the offset then number 10, meaning it's going to give you 10 records, but from record 10 to the number. Then there's some more advanced features, but I won't go into that today. The other one that you can also use is Lyt. You can also use Lyt here. So, but when you're using Lyt, you're gonna first also say Lyt. You're gonna have to do this. So, but generally, I prefer like with Lyt queries, and then you put your value like say. Not the proof, yeah. Okay, so like that would do a light search tree, but generally how I prefer doing it is when you're doing light searches, it's not to do it like this, it's to do let's say we have here a value like right. So it's to instead of doing it like that, right? This will only allow a light search year and year. You understand what I mean with that? It's not going to look for Coca or Cola in any order. It's going to want, like, if you do a light search like this for Coca-Cola, right, it's going to bomb. You won't find Coca-Cola. You understand what I mean? No, what it will do is it will look for anywhere where this exact string is. Yes. It's allowing wildcards here and here, not in the string. You understand? So what I prefer, instead of doing it this way, where you surround it like this, right, is you can surround like this, but your actual value that you're passing, you go val equals val dot replace um, replace that. Uh, you understand what I've done? I'm replacing all the spaces with wildcards. You understand? So now val has wildcard. Now it can, if you look, if there's any cola or coca. You understand? So I prefer this. It gives you much better results than just using the wildcards around the edges. Okay, that's just a pro tip. Okay, just to show you that it's working, just type not to find this one now. Then don't put static in the classes. To each class put in its own class. Don't put invade classes in one another. You see their name not this one. Was found. Okay. Okay. Bullet people. No, this was probably the former. Say again? Yes, and also all of this values is set prepared, so it's done in a proper way that avoids any injection. And any of the reasons we're having because of people putting commas or that sort of that. Okay. All of this behind the scenes is going to be prepared. Yeah. So you understanding now how to use MCQL? So Musonda, the reason why your thing wasn't bringing the set BB because you never said this, right? So it wouldn't know.